Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us tonight on John Hart's virtual tour for his latest book, The Unwilling. My name is Joe Brosnan, and I'm on the marketing team here at St. Martin's Press, where I have the pleasure of working on both John's books as well as CJ Box's. If you know these two authors at all, you know we're all in for a fun night. Tonight, we're partnering with two great independent bookstores in Florida, Murder on the Beach Mystery Bookstore in Delray Beach and Writer's Block Bookstore in Winter Park. Thanks to them, we're able to bring you this final virtual event with John Hart in conversation with fellow New York Times bestselling and fellow Edgar Award-winning author, CJ Box. If you haven't bought your copy of The Unwilling yet, you can click the green button that's down below to purchase copies from either store, and all purchases of The Unwilling will come with signed bookplates. Before we turn it over to John and CJ for their chat, I'm going to tell you a little bit about both authors. John Hart is the author of multiple New York Times bestsellers, the only author in history to win the Best Novel Award of the Edgars consecutively. John has also won the Barry Award, the Southern Independent Booksellers Award for Fiction, the Ian Fleming Steel Dagger, the Southern Book Prize, and the North Carolina Award for Literature. His novels have been translated into 30 languages and can be found in over 70 countries. A former defense attorney and stockbroker, John lives on a farm in Virginia where he writes full-time. And CJ Box is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of 27 novels, including the Joe Pickett series. He won the Edgar Allan Poe Award for Best Novel in 2009, as well as numerous other awards. Over 7 million copies of his books have been sold in the United States and abroad, and they've been translated into 27 languages. He is currently an executive producer for Big Sky on ABC television, which is based on his Cody Hoyt and Cassie Duell novels. And he's also the executive producer on the upcoming Joe Pickett television series for Paramount TV. Box is a Wyoming native and has worked as a ranch hand, a surveyor, a fishing guide, a small town newspaper reporter and editor, and he owned an international tourism marketing firm with his wife, Lori. If you have any questions tonight as we proceed, please drop them down below in the Ask a Question box that you see at the bottom of your screen. We'll be monitoring them as they come in, and later on, I'll be popping back on screen to talk through those questions and ask our authors. And remember to order your signed copy of The Unwilling with the button below. And then now I'm going to turn it over to John and CJ. We're so excited to have you guys here tonight. I'm looking forward to being a fan, and I'm going to minimize my screen now, so I'll catch you guys later.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Joe. Hi, John. So I didn't realize until I heard it that this is the last event on your virtual book tour for this year.
We saved you for the end, Chuck. You know, who could follow you? We can't, we can't start that strong.
And which brings a real question is, how do you compare the marketing and the virtual nature of this book tour versus what you've done in the past where you were traveling around the country?
Well, before I answer your question, I'd like to make an observation for people watching that don't know this. And frankly, I didn't know this until Joe told me that you won the Edgar in 2009, because I won in 2008 and 2010. So we're right there together. And I hope you remember this, but you were actually the presenter who gave me the 2010.
Of course, I remember that. Yeah, that was a fun night.
That was a great night. And the Edgars is kind of like, it's a good segue into the tour. So you know this as well as I do. The Edgar Awards. I mean, I guess there are probably 1,200 people crammed into the Grand Hyatt in New York. The bars are overflowing. People are having a good time staying up until the wee smalls. The physical book tour is similar. I mean, it's exciting. It's constant. It's stimulating. It's physical. It's visual. It's emotional because you get to meet all these readers. And it's a great escape from the lonesomeness of writing. I don't know if you feel that way when you write. I tend to get a little withdrawn and I miss touch with the human race. I have my family and my very close circle of friends, but otherwise I hunker down and don't go out very much. So losing the opportunity to do a physical tour was a bit of a body blow because it's always been a little sanity touchstone for me. After the time, I can't write as quickly as you. I mean, you 27 novels, so wow, congrats on that. I need more time, and so the tours are spaced out, and I need them that much more because of it. the virtual stuff is really wonderful in its own regard because we get to do things like this. I mean, I've met writers that I would probably not have met otherwise, and I've been able to have these great wide-ranging conversations with them. So, it's a trade-off. I know we have people watching. I can't see them. I can't really talk to them. I can't tell if they're enjoying what I'm saying or if they just want me to be quiet and let Chuck Box, be the star of the show. I can't read the crowd. So it's a very different thing, but I think we're blessed that we can do this. And maybe it's really all about bandwidth, because I don't think 5 years ago this would have worked.
Right. Good point. Yeah, I've got a book coming out in 2 weeks, so I'll be doing my virtual tour as well.
Oh, congratulations.
I don't know if I'm looking forward to it or not. I guess I am.
I tell you, it's not bad. I mean, you do get to stay home. You do get to stay with your family. It is hard though to not have the contact with the readers. I find that very affirming.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, writing is just words on the page, and it's the occasional communication with your publisher, your agent, people in the business, and you kind of forget, if you don't have the experience with the readers, what this is all about in the first place. I mean, it's not about getting paid. It's about being a writer and interacting with people that care enough to read what you do.
Well, let's talk about this book. It seems like it was ages ago that I read The Galley. And I think that was another question. Was it originally scheduled to come out this last summer?
Yes, it was supposed to come out in June.
Okay.
And sometime in March, when things were really terrifying and uncertain, we decided to push it.
Okay. Well, I loved it. I think I'm a sucker, for a couple of things. One, you had me at the word family in the description. That's one thing. And then as soon as I started reading it, which something that I always love is a great sense of place. And Charlotte, North Carolina, is that where you're from?
30 miles north, a little town called Salisbury. It's just straight up the interstate. But, Charlotte, I went to Davidson College, which was 17 miles outside of Charlotte. So I was in there a lot. And I remember it somewhat from back in the 70s. I had to dirty it up a little bit, make it a little darker, a little more crime-ridden for the book. But the rest of it, I think I stayed fairly true to the feel of the place.
Good. I thought you did a great. I felt like I knew the place, the area, the people, the culture so much better when I was done with the book than I ever would have when I opened it. And that's something I always judge as a rewarding kind of thing. I mean, the plot, of course, is, page turning, but I love feeling like I've been there. And I think you rendered that well.
Well, and
one thing I was
you do that as well, Chuck. I mean, I love the space that we operate in, because we can write stories with universal elements that people can understand and relate to no matter where they live. But if you are enamored of a certain area, as you are with the West, and as I am with my native North Carolina, you can give readers the opportunity to experience that in maybe a fresh, different way.
Well, you did that well. And I was wondering if two things I wanted to ask you, and I'll just kind of step back. One, the novel takes place in 1972, and I thought you rendered that very well. I was around then. I don't think you were around hardly at all.
I was
I was wondering, one, how did you do the research? How did you get into that era in your head to do it? And the other thing, I'm just asked two-part question. If you could talk about the family within the book and the dynamics of the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I'm going to start by saying, and this is something that I don't talk about a lot, but it is sort of fun it's a fun thing to share with readers in instances like this. Whenever I start a new book, I often try to find some uniquely personal challenge, something I've never done before. My first female protagonist, my first adult themed thriller driven by a 13-year-old kid. I really wanted to try to set something entirely in the past. It's a different animal. You know as well as I do. Modern technology makes plotting a book so easy. If you need your character to move right or left, boom, he gets a cell phone call and off he goes. You can't do that in 1972. So speaking then about why 1972, it was when the Vietnam War was still terrifying. People were still being drafted and living in fear of the draft. And I wanted that as a little bit of a backdrop to the story, and something that informs the actions of the characters. It's not a war story. The family element that you mentioned is very important to me. I think that you'll find in almost any book I write, there's a strong family element, because everybody gets that, whether they come from a good family, a bad one, an indifferent one, an absent one. If I write a dysfunctional family and people with similar families read it, they might go, I'm not the only one. Or people can look at it and marvel at the dysfunction. But for me, it's a little deeper than that. I think when it comes to family, hurts cut deeper, memories linger, the stakes are raw and personal in a way that you might not find in other relationships. And so it just makes for a rich backdrop. But it's a crime story, it's a thriller. So those are sort of the foundations that I laid underneath the crime novel. In terms of why 1972, I remember it as a child, 7 years old. And what I remember is the simplicity that I suspect you remember from your own childhood. We played in the creeks and we rode our bikes until after dark, and nobody really worried about us too much. We didn't have iPhones, pads, all these things now that are just the bane of my existence as a parent. So I wanted to write something that captured some of the simplicity that I felt and remembered from that time. And my younger protagonist, Gibby French, who is 18, is 2 weeks away from graduating high school. He's been overprotected by his parents since his two older brothers went to Vietnam. One died and one came back very, very changed. He represents that simplicity. But you and I both know that the 70s were a pretty tumultuous time. I mean, in many ways, a close parallel to what we've been through in the past little bit and what we're still dealing with. You had war, Cold War, inflation, corruption, racial strife. We're not too far off the Kent State shootings. There are riots in prisons. I mean, there's communism. I mean, there are all these fears. There's Watergate. And so I wanted to sort of capture the complexity of that era, meld it with my memories of the simplicity of that era, and build a story with that as part of that underpinning. And so I did have to create this family, the French family. The father is a 30-year murder cop. The mother is sort of a socialite who really has been suffering since her favorite son, her firstborn, died early in the Vietnam War. And then his twin brother decides to go for his own reasons and does 3 tours. And he's a pretty terrifying soldier. I mean, he's highly skilled and running black ops, in and out of the DMZ. But then something happens near the end of his 3rd tour, and he comes home under a cloud, and, addicted to drugs and dishonorably discharged, and very quickly ends up in prison for heroin. And the book really opens when he comes home, and it's a story of the collision of this older boy that represents, again, for me as the writer, all these complexities of that era, and then the innocence of the younger boy, who is just, all he wants to do is become a man, become an adult, figure out what he is going to be and what he's going to stand for. And the parents want something very different. And then we get to the crime story. This is all set up pretty quickly, and then we get to the juicy parts.
And you did it well. Talk about the character of X, which I found fascinating.
Okay, so keeping in mind the setup, the older brother Jason, literally the first scene is he steps off a bus and is recognized as he steps back into the city of Charlotte. He's been gone for all this time. And we don't know much about him at that point. We know that he's been to war, he's been to prison. We have no idea what happened to him in either of those places. Something goes terribly wrong, maybe 25 pages into the book, when these two brothers are reunited and they're out for a day in the convertible with a couple of women. And they come across this prison transfer bus, and there are 15 or 20 prisoners on board. And one of the women, Tyra, who is, oh my gosh, Tyra, she's cruel, she's sexual, she's selfish, and quite drunk. And in her drunken state, she decides it would be fun to torment these prisoners in a very provocative manner. And it leads to a riot on the bus and a beatdown. And 2 days later, she turns up quite dead. Well, what this puts in motion takes us to this character you ask about, X, who is, he's probably the only truly larger than life character I've ever written. He's a very wealthy man condemned to death and living in a sub basement under death row. but he's got fingers and pies and strings and levers that he can pull to move things in the prison and outside of the prison because of his great wealth. And he has a fascination with Jason for reasons that we don't understand until near the end of the book. But I describe X as the most dangerous man alive. He's killed 69 people. He's brilliant. He's unfathomable in many ways. And this most dangerous man alive decides he wants Jason back in prison. And that's sort of the setup there. But I had a lot of fun writing X, even though for my career to date, I've really tried to avoid this whole idea of the criminal mastermind. I just don't generally believe they exist. But he's a little special character for me.
Special character. Yeah, you know, when I read about him, it reminded me of, I think one of the worst villains I have ever read, and that is the judge in Cormac McCarthy what's it called? Blood Meridian.
Blood Meridian. I've not read that. I know of it.
Just a horrific man who's also fascinating at the same time. So well done. I was trying to think, you know, what kind of questions do I wish I was asked by readers. So one of them, I mean, we are both in, you know, considered crime or mystery genre writers. I think we probably both don't think of ourselves that way. And so here's my question. What do you hope that readers take away from The Unwilling?
Okay,
aside from the plot.
That is such a fair question, and I suspect that we're in the same way. And we could probably spend 2 hours talking about this. You know, the way I've always looked at it, you know, I'm in the business of telling stories that keep people up until 3 a.m. That's what I aspire to do. That is my goal. If, however, they feel unexpected things, learn unexpected things, consider the world from a perspective they might not normally have, you know, found their way to. I don't want to say that that's an accidental knock on, but it is something that I try to do as long as it doesn't take away from the story. I'm a big believer in character. I think character is, you know, I mean, it's the top of the pyramid. I suspect you read The Prince of Tides by Pat Conroy. You know, it came out in 1986. I was 21 years old. I could not tell you the plot of the book really, but I could describe those characters even now, you know, 30 whatever years later. So, you know, I do aspire to that. I want people to feel these characters so that, okay, so X creates high stakes. I mean, there are high stakes when it comes to a character like X. Often I write about more realistic stakes, and in order to get the emotional buy-in from the readers, they have to understand the characters very, very well. So I put a lot of time into the characters. I put a tremendous amount of time into the language. I think that language done well, and I don't pretend to be at the top of any pyramid here. I just care about it a lot. But language done well can create an emotional resonance in the reader that goes beyond what's happening on the page. And I suspect you know exactly what I'm talking about. I mean, you can, you know, word choice, cadence, word placement. I mean, the juxtaposition of certain, you know, vibrations created by words that we all know and have different, you know, strong reactions to. If I can accomplish that at the proper moments in the book, I think that it makes everything that much more resonant and, I don't know, engaging. So I do like it when people respond to my books like that. It's interesting because, you know, some of my books, not all of them, can get a little violent. I mean, this is one. You know, I tried to be judicious, meaning when the young woman is killed, even though it's a pretty vicious killing, I do it off the page. You don't see it happen. And yet when Jason ends up back in prison and confronted with this terrifying fellow who is a great connoisseur of physical violence and has trained all his life to be adept at that, you know, I've really enjoyed writing these confrontations, these sort of prison confrontations between those guys. So it's a balancing act. You know, you want to try to, you know, strum a chord and at the same time recognize that we unabashedly write in the thriller space.
Well put. I remember thinking at the time, like I said, it was a while ago because of the when I got the galley, but I was thinking there could easily be a sequel. There's some threads that are kind of left dangling, and I shouldn't ever ask you this, but I mean, is that something you have in mind down the road, or?
Yeah, and well, in fact, I was at work on book 8. I don't know, 3 or 4 months into it, and I became very enamored with this idea of doing a sequel or even a prequel. And I took about 2 or 3 months and noodled around with that to see if I could find the right thread. And it was just too fresh. I was too close to it. I couldn't find the right vehicle for that story. I would like to revisit these characters. I think they're great. Whether they're good people or bad, I love them all. I mean, desperately. I spent way too much energy creating them. And yet I've always been jealous of people who successfully create series type characters, that we can revisit time and time again, because I think that that's so rich to the reader. They fall in love with these recurring characters and come back for more and more. I've written one sort of sequel, and I'm actually working now on a sequel to Redemption Road, which was my 5th novel. I've not yet found a character that I'm loving enough to do, book over book. But, my next book may very well be a sequel to this. I don't know. Again, I don't like being limited when I start a story. And that's the downside of recurring characters is, once they're sort of baked, I mean, they can grow and you can put them through traumatic changing events or whatever. But, that's your character. And it makes it hard to discover the unexpected wonders of people you've not yet met.
I just thought that I should never ask a question like that when representatives from our publisher are on the call.
Yeah, maybe not. But it's okay.
Sorry, a race.
Hey, we're in the truth telling business now, CJ. That's what we're here for.
So, in the just an overall kind of question, do you find it easier or harder or neither to have been writing in the past year during the pandemic?
It's interesting. I had the same conversation with Tammy Hogue, who's a lovely woman who was kind enough to do one of these events for me. And she asked the same question, and I told her truthfully, because again, we're truth tellers now. I found it surprisingly problematic, at least for a while, and this whole thing broke free. And my children were home and nobody knew what was coming. And, we were quarantining mail because we didn't know if this thing could live on cardboard. And, it was very difficult to find the peace of mind to go deep into words on the page. And I'm sure there are writers out there that will tell you they've written 4 books in the past year because there's nothing else to do. But one of the things Tammy told me was that she's asked this question of numerous writers. I mean, many, many writers. And the overwhelming response is that it's been more difficult rather than easier to produce, which, comforted me and surprised me.
As for me, I found it easier.
Did you?
And mainly because I'm not traveling. And my biggest blocks over the last 20 years have been getting a book going, getting really into it, then leaving it, and going on the road or going to an event or something. And without any of those things, I found myself extremely productive. I'm so far ahead, I can't even believe it.
Okay, can I officially hit you now? I'm a little envious of that.
I plan to spend a lot of time fishing and playing golf this summer, guilt-free.
See, that's the best part. The guilt-free part. Things are going really well now. I'm happy to say. I mean, I'm really in the groove and enjoying the book I'm writing. But there was a period just at the beginning, those 3 or 4 months, that were really unsettling and did not help the cause.
Are you pleased so far with the reception for the book? I read a really good review by our friend Olene in Florida the other day, and I assume that the reviews are good and the reception's good.
I think so. It seems to be harder and harder to find the print space, to find the attention that books drew maybe even 10 years ago. I mean, there's so many distractions fighting for people's eyeballs these days. But Olene was very kind, wrote a lovely review, and has been, talking up our event tonight. So thank you, Olene. I'm happy with the book. People who have read the book are happy with it. I've had some of the kindest words ever directed toward this book. But they're all, how it is, they're all my babies. So I don't like to stack them up one against the other.
Have you noticed, I don't know how carefully you track sales, but with the pandemic, are you noticing a difference in the number of books being purchased, either in hardcover or ebook, or the pace or pre-sales of those books?
No, it's too fresh now. I mean, this book's only been out for a week, so I don't really have enough to form a thesis on. I think that the brick and mortar stores have seen reduced foot traffic, which makes hand selling less of an issue, which is unfortunate because I think hand selling is so important. I do think that for people that are recurring #1 bestsellers, I would imagine it's been good because so many books are bought online, and people go to the familiar names and the ones that they love, which I think is wonderful. That's fine. I'm very thankful that this is not my first novel. Let's put it that way. I think this would be a very difficult time to find readers if you didn't have some name recognition.
That's a good point. Oh yeah, I have thought about that. I feel for the new ones. Having done a lot of blurbs for first novels over the last year, and then never seeing a thing when they came out, I just my heart breaks for some of those authors for that.
I know, well, and I worry about the long-term well-being of the industry. I mean, we need these people. We need the new voices. But again, I think that what we're dealing with now is not going to last forever. And if the bookstores can hang tight and get back to a more resilient economy where people are more comfortable, walking in and out of stores, I suspect we'll come back. But it's like, my favorite restaurants, bars, movie theaters, and I'm just praying that they're still here when this thing finally goes away.
Mm-hmm. Me too. Well, are there any questions that you wish I would have asked you that I?
No, honestly, I'm just happy to riff on you, Chuck. Anything you want to talk about? I wouldn't mind talking about your new book. How about we spend a minute or two or three on what you have coming out in 2 weeks? What's the pitch? What's the elevator speech?
The next, it's a Joe Pickett novel. It'll be out March 2nd. It's called Dark Sky. I really felt like it was time to kind of strip it back to the studs with Joe Pickett and put him in a position where he's in the mountains. He's guiding a tech mogul who wants to learn how to elk hunt when they realize some people are hunting them. Mm-hmm. And it really is a survival story. No weapons, no communications, men on horseback after men on foot. And really, I think in a weird way, a pandemic novel about isolation that hardly mentions the pandemic. But that was my frame of mind at the time. And I'm happy the way it came out.
Well, I love the point that you just made. I mean, the frame of mind is so important. So again, when I started The Unwilling, it takes a while to write these things, and then it takes even longer for them to come out sometimes. And, so it was probably, 2018 when I started writing this. And, that sense of country divided was so everywhere. And I really did want to write a story that kind of addressed that in a positive light. This idea that if I could remind people that we've been divided as a nation before, we've been through hard times, and how important it is to act in good faith. And I think that we've lost a lot of good faith in this country. And I don't care what your political spectrum is, anyone watching, I think that the social media and, the 24-hour news cycle and all these things, they've just so effectively divided the nation into camps. We listen to the people that are going to tell us what we believe, and it becomes harder and harder to understand other people in the country. And I wanted to sort of capture some of that and remind people that, we can't afford to live that way.
I think that when I asked earlier what you wanted readers to come away with from the book, I think that's something that I was reminded of when I read the book, and I hope readers come away with from your book, is that you often hear so many people say that the country has never been so divided as it is now. It's at a tipping point. But anyone who lived through the early 70s or maybe ever read about the Civil War would know mm-hmm. that no, it's not exactly unique. So
yeah, history rhymes.
So, you want to take some? Let's take some questions. Are there some questions, Joe?
Hey guys, yeah, I have a couple from people who've dropped them in the chat. So thanks everyone who's dropped them. If you haven't, still time. So put questions down. Start with Bonnie, who was the first to put a question forward. I guess for either of you, when you're starting to come up with your story, do you start with just a nugget, or are you an extensive outliner? Do you draft the whole thing?
This will be interesting. I really think that there's a bright line separating novelists, those who outline and those who, I call it grope and hope. I've heard it called pantsing, just by the seat of your pants. I generally have a pretty good idea of whose story I want to tell and what their issues are, whatever their emotional baggage might be, whether it's fear, shame, loathing, anger. They're going to have to wrestle with some deep emotional component. And then I try to find a story to spin them along that will allow them to grow, because we don't want them to be the same on the last page as the person that we met on page one. It's beyond the story arc. It's the character arc. But I know authors that will do 200-page outlines. How about you, Chuck?
I don't do 200-page outlines, but I'm an outliner. I always start with a contemporary issue or two that I want, a controversy, something I want to get into. I do the research on that. For the Dark Sky book coming up, I feel pretty prescient because a big part of the book is the impact of social media on real people on the ground. And here we have a tech mogul who is responsible for that, and he has to confront that.
I like it.
So I started, then I do an outline, bullet point outline. Sometimes it's 5 pages. I've gone as probably high as 40 pages all the way to the end. Doesn't mean I stick with it. Doesn't mean I have the same ending that I start with, but that helps me on days. You don't always feel like writing every day, but if you know where the story's going, at least you can push it forward a little bit. So that helps me stay on track.
Well, let me ask you this.
I don't think there's a right or wrong way.
Well, let me ask you this, Chuck, because this amazes me sometimes. We all have those days when we just want to drive the story forward. We know we need to be at our desk. We can't just goof off because we're not in the mood, right? That's the difference between professional writers and not. And yet I've had people come to me back when I could actually interact with the real world and tell me that this scene or the other was the most important passage of the book to them. And the number of times it's been a passage that I just remember thinking, I just need to get through this day. I need to get to the next step. It always amazes me that those passages, which I feel, to be somewhat inconsequential as much as one can be, for some, and sometimes many, are really significant. Have you ever had that experience?
I have, and I agree that sometimes it's a little comprehensible. That's the one they picked out, or that's the thing they focused on. But I think that's just, I always think it kind of relates to that reader's life in some way that you could never anticipate, that strikes them as unique or impactful in some way. And I certainly welcome that. I wish I could do it deliberately, and not just find out later. But yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, one observation before we go back to the next question, Joe. I've often described the relationship between writers and readers as the last great form of intimate communication between total strangers. And what you just described is exactly what I mean. If we all go see the same movie, we experience the same movie, but we all read the same book and we experience it differently because we bring our life experiences with us and we see things the way our mind conjures them. I just think that's one of the wonderful things about fiction. I think you just rang the bell with the way you described it. Okay, Joe, sorry.
No. This is great. All right. So I like this question from Jennifer. What has been the hardest scene to write in any of your books? Do you have one that sticks out?
I'll let you go first, Chuck.
The
hardest scene to write?
Hardest scene.
Is there any one that stands out?
I would say I had several of those very hard scenes to write in the book I wrote called The Highway, about the serial killer truck driver. And because I, kind of like John did in this book, have some really, really graphic violence, and it's violence from a truck driver towards a prostitute or a innocent woman. But I never described it on the page. I've had readers since say, I could not get through that book. It was so horribly graphic that I threw it. one person said they took it out and put it in the trash, and then they were afraid that the garbage guy would find it and read it, so they put it out in chunks. But whenever I get that question, I say, point me to the page where you read this graphic violence. It's alluded to, it's written around. It's much easier just to write it out, but I think it's more effective if it's not spelled out sometimes, and sometimes hinted at, or sometimes a throwaway line. So those are hard things to write. That's one thing I can think of.
So I'll totally agree with you, because people read thrillers to escape, and that generally does mean the stakes have to be higher than your average day at the park, and that involves death and bad things. So yeah, those are required at times, and yes, they can be tough to write. I would say the hardest scene I ever had to write was my first sex scene. Simply because, I knew that my wife was going to read this, and her friends were going to read it if it got published, and my mom was going to read it if it got published. And it's just, but here's the trick, and this works, I think, as well with writing a sex scene as it does with describing a character, and getting to the place that Chuck was describing, where the readers are so convinced that it was like this really graphic murder, this really graphic sex scene. That's not necessarily the case. If I'm describing a character and I give just 2 or 3 little tidbits, the reader generally fills it in, and they see them very clearly. I get this question all the time, who would you cast in your movies? Because I see so-and-so so clearly, and I can't see that. But it's the same thing with a sex scene. It's about motion and sensation and color and all that stuff. You can do it in a way that you don't have to be like Thomas Wolfe in I Am Charlotte Simmons, or Tom Wolfe. I get those two confused. But, he won the worst sex and fiction award. And so if you Google it, it's horrible. It's horrifying. I Am Charlotte Simmons, worst sex and fiction award. Your skin will crawl. So, yeah, but mainly it was just because that was the first time I really had to confront this idea that, people that matter to me will read this eventually. My daughters, are old enough to read these books now. But people want real life in these books, and that's part of it.
I have a similar had a similar experience, but kind of the opposite. I was at a panel once, and somebody asked, isn't it difficult to write a sex scene? And I got flip and said, well, my protagonist is married, so there are no sex scenes.
You paid
that line goes back to my lovely wife later, and I'm still regretting that.
Yeah, you paid for that one.
All right. I'm going to come to a question that Oline actually left, but first, she does agree that The Highway scared her more than any other novel. So congrats, Chuck.
Thanks, Oline.
But this question's for John. Did you talk to any Vietnam vets while you were writing The Unwilling?
Yeah, great question. So, researching a book set entirely in the past, there are things you want to get right. I generally hate research because it feels like work. And, the great thing about writing fiction is people can like it or not, but they can't really tell you that you're wrong. I didn't seek out specific Vietnam vets. I've known a number over the years. So no, the Vietnam element it's kind of like we're talking about this sex scene business. You broad stroke it into the back of the storyline, present it through this one character who's come back really shaped by what he went through, and making him believable is more about the sort of empathy that all writers must have. Empathy is the single most important thing to making really compelling characters. And I'm great at that. Whether I deliver it on the page or not, I don't know, but I'm an incredibly empathetic person. I can put myself in almost anyone's shoes. So I've always known enough about the Vietnam War. I've known enough people who fought there. I didn't really need to do that research. I did have to get a little bit specific about, what was going on in those months and that year so that I could inform my character's background in a meaningful way. And I'll give you, for instance, I wanted him to be a really remarkable soldier. Just truly misunderstood, but it is core, courageous in all the right ways. And I read a story about a guy who was running disguised gunboats up and down these starlit rivers into the DMZ to rescue downed American aviators. And I just love just the power of that. I mean, night after night, he's just going into these horrible places and saving the lives of these brave airmen. So that's the backstory I gave Jason. There's a lot of other things that I sort of built into his character based on what really happened in Vietnam. The My Lai massacre is a big part of it.
I was going to say,
yeah, but no, I mean, I don't try to get too much into what individuals experienced in the war. I don't want to riff on their lives or their stories. It's just kind of it's out there. I've known a few of them, and I pulled from that. Thank you for the question.
Cool. A couple people are asking after just any advice for aspiring authors that either of you can give.
Let me go first, Chuck, and then
Sure.
Then I want you to bring that one home, because I get this question a lot, and I meet a lot of young writers, and I think it's really important to help them, and I try to do it whenever I can, because it is people that don't play in this space don't really understand how unforgiving the industry is, how hard it is to get that first step. The first advice I would give someone is recognize that the world is full of doubters that will tell you can't do it. And these are people who've given up on their own dreams, and the last thing they want to see is someone like you succeed. So be careful who you tell what you're doing. I mean, I like to keep it quiet when possible. Don't talk about your stories, because that dilutes the power that you're feeling in these stories. It's easy to talk about stuff. Save that, bottle it up, keep it in, and put it on the page. And find a reader that you really trust. And that's an important thing. And it sounds easy, but it's really tricky, because if you give it to your mom and she tells you you're a genius, you're not going to believe her. And if you give it to your girlfriend and she says it's terrible, you're going to be crushed. And a writer's ego needs to be strong, because it's not just about the time and the coming up with the ideas and the millions of choices that go into every novel. It's about the conviction in your soul that you have something worthy of sharing that people will pay for, spend their time reading, tell their friends about. Otherwise, what's the point? So it's important to keep faith in yourself, safeguard all those little weak spots. Don't let anybody take your joy away. And then finally, don't be scared of criticism. The number of people I've met that said, "Hey, it's on the page, it's sacrosanct, I'm not going to touch it." That's insanity. We can all learn. I'm still learning. So be open to that criticism.
I think that's all good advice. I would endorse that. I'll throw some, not cold water, but tough love. I'm off.
I knew you would, Chuck.
Too many aspiring writers don't read widely. They're so in love with the sound of their own voice or their words on the page that they don't know, they have not read other books. Or so that's some advice I always give authors is read books that you don't think you're going to like, that aren't in your wheelhouse. Find out how these authors that are successful are doing it. How do they put together, deconstruct their books to figure out how they made you feel a certain way. I'm pretty much self-taught, except for journalism, and that's what I did. I went back to my favorite books and almost kind of like read them backwards in a way, in chunks, to see how that author constructed it. But I think the biggest thing is to read widely. The sound of your own voice is only good to you, or maybe a couple of close friends or a relative. But you're actually writing for other people too. And just because you've got a great idea, or the other thing is work on one book at a time. When I meet people and they say, geez, I've got the first 10 books in this series all planned out, I hear it as, I'm not going to put everything I can into the one book that might get me published. I'm holding a lot of things back for down the road. And I think everything should go into that first book and then figure out the second one.
It's great answers. Had a couple comments in questions from Henry in the chat. First, he's up to date and current with both of you guys, so big fan here. And I guess this question is for Chuck. Have you interviewed police officers that help you write police procedural tactics?
Yes. I really enjoy that. And one thing I've learned is cops spend all day trying to figure out how they would have gotten away with it, because they see the errors. And I've gotten some of the best plot points and betrayals and tricks from cops who said, if I were going to do that, here's what I would do. And so I think I learned when I was a reporter, one of the greatest, not a trick, it's just it's a phenomenon. If you stand in front of somebody with an open notebook, they feel compelled to fill it. And they'll tell you all sorts of things they probably shouldn't say. Even after saying they're not going to tell you all the tricks of the trade, they keep going on and on and on. And I've talked to sometimes scientists, weapons people, where I finally just hold up my hand and say, please don't tell me any more about how to take down a nuclear reactor. Please do not, because I'll write about it. Because that's what they think about all day. And the cops are very much like that.
And, thanks, Chuck. John, I guess the question wasn't directed to you, but I'd like to ask you the same one. Have you talked to police?
No, I really haven't. I don't know why. I just, what I do is very intimate to me. I try to avoid plots that require a lot of procedural stuff. I know just enough to, again, it's nuance, it's shading. I'm much more interested in what drives the people to do the things they do. What are the repercussions of these, bad deeds? And generally, I try to keep it grounded in real life decisions. I mean, except for X, in my world, there are no criminal masterminds. I mean, most crimes are committed by short-sighted people making foolish decisions for base reasons, with no idea of the consequences that will flow out in every direction from this. So the joy for me is exploring how those ripples affect families, communities, and it's not so much a procedural. So, for instance, the book I'm writing now is the main character is a cop who's been kicked off the force, and she's kind of drawn into this thing. It's wonderful for me because she doesn't have access to the autopsy reports and the ballistics and all those things, and so I don't have to worry about that too much. It's more about why is she there, what is she hoping to accomplish, and how far is she going to go. The time may come where I want to do that, but I wasn't kidding when I say research for me feels like work. I think listening to you, Chuck, and Patricia Cornwell, I've been speaking a lot lately. She did an event with me last week. She loves research and she's so good at it. And I marvel at the things you can learn and the fascinating people you can meet that live completely different lives. I mean, there must be 1,000 points of inspiration in talking to those people. And I suspect I'll get there at some point. But honestly, I'm just happy to sit on the farm and, right, without doing that.
Well, it's like outline, no outline. There is no wrong way.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoy the research aspect a lot myself because that puts me into the book in ways that I couldn't do in my own head. So I like talking to people who have a certain expertise that nobody ever asked them about because
Mm-hmm.
they love to talk about what they do. And I think that makes the books feel more authentic, especially to people who might be in that same field. So it's a different approach, but nothing.
Well, look, I like everything you're saying, and honestly, listening to you and having had a very similar conversation last week on one of these events with Patricia Cornwell, I think I'm missing out on something. I mean, because not just for the story. I think everything you said makes a lot of sense, and what you can bring to the story. Not to mention just the great ideas you can get, but just in life in general. I mean, there are fascinating people out there, and it's easy to forget that when we're head down in the keyboard every day. So,
all right, cool. I think we got time for one or two more.
I might have to plug in my computer in the middle of this question, so I'm going to run away, go get the cord.
I got you covered, Chuck. I got you covered, man.
Sorry, last one for John.
Clock's ticking, buddy.
That's funny. This one comes from Talia, who works on our library marketing.
I know Talia.
There you go. Yeah. Talia is calling people out in the comments for being wusses for getting squeamish at the highway. So, but she asked, you talked earlier about how it's a tough time. You're glad you're not a debut author. Is there anything you've read recently that maybe is a debut or, something early in someone's career that you'd recommend?
Yeah, actually, and it comes out in March. There's a guy named Chris Whitaker, wrote a book, and I think I get the title right. We Begin at the End. It's his third novel. I know it's done well in the UK. His first two, I'm sure, were wonderful. I haven't read them, but I think this is going to be his breakout book. It's a big, really wonderful story about a young girl. Put me a lot in mind of my character in The Last Child. I mean, just a really nicely done book, and nicely in caps. I mean, just nicely done book. So yeah, that's it. I can't read as much when I'm writing because I start to sound like those people, and that's dangerous business. I call it voice.
Sure, yeah.
You know, but I'd recommend that. It comes out in March.
Talia is a fan, so good choice.
Yeah. Oh, Talia's a fan of
Yeah,
that. Oh,
she
good.
said, so good.
Yeah, no, it's good. Duchess, yeah, it's great. It's highly recommended.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry.
No worries. I'll ask you the same question, Chuck. We had talked earlier about how it's a tough time right now for someone who's a debut novelist or trying to launch their career. Is there anything you've read recently that you can give a little shout out for right now? Something to rec?
Oh, geez, yes. Oh, I wish I would have written some of the books down. I've read a lot over the last few months on a lot of debuts. Trying to think of the particular names. One called The Lost Highway, takes place in Canada. Chevy Stevens wrote that. I thought that was a really good one.
You and Highways.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. There's the name of it. It's set in Jackson Hole, about building a multi-millionaire house. Really creepy, and I cannot come up with the name of it. So I apologize for that. Nothing worse than not being able to remember the name of the book or the author. Never make that mistake.
My wife can never remember the authors. She remembers books, and I'm like, honey, you're married to an author. It's placed in this house. You got to remember the authors.
A first novel that really bowled me over was Winter Counts. And the guy David, he's got 4 names. 3 of them kind of hard to pronounce Sioux Indian names. Winobly, Winter Counts. I know that's the name of it. I loved it because it was the first contemporary novel I've ever read from the standpoint of a Sioux Indian author who I thought was rendered really realistic and uncompromising. And I would urge anybody who hasn't read that book to find that one.
Thanks. Yeah, I've seen great things on that one. I feel like it was hitting a lot of lists. We got some fans in the comments too. Looking through if we got any more.
John, while you're looking, if you've got one, go ahead. I was going to do a follow up with Chuck, but
no, go for it.
Well, while you were searching out your charger, we were talking about I was discussing the risks of reading people that I really admire while I'm writing my own stuff, because I tend to internalize voice and bastardize it, and it affects the voice that I'm trying to create on the page. Do you ever have that trouble, or can you keep them separate?
Well, I can kind of keep them separate, I think. And one thing, but I think writing in general and tips for writing, and something that a lot of would-be authors have trouble with, is point of view. Mm-hmm. Is it omniscient? Does it bounce around? Is every passage told from a different point of view? Getting that wrong can jar you out of a book in ways that sometimes you don't even know why. And I think so. It's so important to make sure you know who's thinking it and why, and don't jump back and forth. I think it makes too much work for the reader to try to figure that out. Mm-hmm. So I try very hard to always write from a specific point of view, even from I have a lot of child characters, and that's always interesting to kind of get in kind of get into that point of view, but hopefully it works.
Cool.
Oh, right. And by the way, somebody helped me out from Criminal Element. Yeah, Chevy Stevens' upcoming book is called Dark Roads, not Dark Highway.
Understandable why you went there. All right. Yeah, I guess we got last question comes from Sarah Bonamino. Do either of you have a favorite comment that you've heard a reader talk to you about when they're, telling you about their books, like something specific that stood out? Or any types of comments if you want to be more broad?
So you're asking about comments about a book I've written or Chuck's written from a reader?
Yeah.
Actually, there was a really smart guy. I think he's really just outstanding human being who read The Unwilling and described it as being raw, brutal, exquisite. What was your quote, Chuck? Raw, tender, brutal, and exquisite, all at the same time. Chuck blurbed the book, raw, brutal, tender, and exquisite, all at the same time. I think that's the best blurb I've ever had, because there's so many contradictory words in that very brief sentence, and yet that's exactly what the book is. So, and by the way, I haven't, at least face-to-face, thank you for that blurb, Chuck. So thank you.
Oh, it was my pleasure. I love reading a good book. Jeez. I'm trying to think of a comment. I have had people sometimes just kind of floor me by saying things like, because the books are, set in the outdoors and, they're sort of about hunting and fishing. And I've had people say things like, my 14-year-old son was a big fan of your books, and he was recently killed on a raft trip incident. And when we read your books, we think of him, and it means so much to us. And I have no idea how to respond to that other than I, of course, appreciate it, but I kind of think I'm not worthy of that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's powerful. All right, so I think we're going to wrap things up.
I'm sorry, Joe. I'm loving your cat, man. It's making me laugh.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, big fan.
There's a tail sticking out of your ear. Did you know that?
Yeah, that happens when I'm working after 6. Yeah, but no. So I just wanted to thank you both for joining us, and thank both of our bookstores for co-hosting with us. Again, the link down below. You can buy copies of John's books, Chuck's books, anyone's books. Support your indies. Chuck, you have a tour coming up. I'm going to drop a link so people can stop by your future events. Yeah, of course. So more Chuck coming. And John, thank you. I know this was the last event, but it's not the last we'll hear from you. So
and thank you, Joe, and everybody there who's put this together. I mean, I know it takes a lot of legwork and creative thinking, and you guys really put together a great tour. So thank you for that. And Chuck, thank you again.
Oh, my pleasure. And again, congratulations. This is a dandy.
Appreciate that. Good luck in 2 weeks.
Thank you.
All right. Take care, everybody.
All right.